I'm not the type to try and hitch a ride from someone else. If I can help it, I would rather just get to where I'm going on my own accord. When the engine of my car started to sputter its final breaths, however, it left me stranded. The particular stretch of road that my car decided to break down on was pretty removed from civilization. The nearest town in any direction is a 40-mile walk. Naturally, it was night. The type of night where you can see the stars dotting the sky, but you couldn't see 7 feet in front of you. The dark wasn't what was crawling into my skin though. It was the rumours associated with the road, or perhaps the facts that created the rumours. Being such a long stretch of uninterrupted pavement, the road was a breeding ground for hikers. Not all who wandered this road would make the return trip home. It's estimated that around 70 hitchhikers would venture on the road and leave without a trace. Law enforcement eventually stopped investigating the disappearances and would assume anyone lost on the road wouldn't be making it back home. The most recent of these cases being Laurie Marlins, who was headed back home for the holidays. When she didn't show up to her parents' place a day later, they filed a missing report. She was a cute girl that looked good on missing posters, so people paid more attention than they would for the typical vagabond, none of which had commanding bright blue eyes and fiery red hair like she did. The rumours of some serial killer patrolling the roads sprang up, along with more outlandish ideas, like aliens or mystical creatures from the forest the road passed as people tried to justify her disappearance. Never the type for superstition, I have to admit that surrounded by a globe of darkness that stretched out forever, the rumours got to me. I decided it would be just as dangerous to sit by my car and wait for the morning to rescue me. If something was out there lurking, it was going to find me, whether or not I was walking around, so walk I did. The light tapping of my rubber soles on the hard pavement was the only source of noise other than the occasional cricket. Every time I would pass by a patch of turf that had grown particularly high, I could feel my body tense up for an impact that never occurred. As soon as I cleared each patch, the built-up tension would release in a heavy sigh. My breath swirled in the cool air. Whenever I pulled my cell phone out to see if I had received a signal, I was met with a red X in the upper hand corner. With the nearest city so far away, towers would be an unlikely sight. I could have been walking for hours with little progress, each small and timid step barely distancing myself from the car, but with enough time, that too faded from sight. As I focused on the white line reaching out in front of me, I saw a faint glow pressing against the blacktop. My feet began to pick up a vibration as the yellow glow grew brighter and brighter. Turning around to face the source of the light, I observed a large truck barreling down the highway. I contemplated how I had likely only made it a few miles at best in a very extensive amount of time, and like I'd seen in the movies, I stuck out my arm. With my thumb pushed out as far as I could, the truck started slowing to a halt. My glee was immense. The thought that I was going to happily jump into a truck with a stranger wasn't even present. Trotting up to the door of the 18-wheeler, I waited for it to open. I could hear a rustle from inside the truck, and I bounced on my increasingly sore feet, trying to get a glimpse inside. As I was about to speak, the large metal door pried open and revealed the cab of the truck. A large and imposing man, shrouded by the night, sat by the driver's seat. "That your car back there?" His voice boomed from the cab. He had to speak up over the sound of the truck's various mechanisms still running. "Yeah." I looked back in the direction I had come from. The darkness had a slight scarlet hue, basked by the brake lights. "The thing just crapped out without warning." My arms were crossing my chest as if it would fight off the onslaught of the chilled air. I could feel a vague warmth emanating from inside the truck, and I yearned for it. I'm not much of a car guy, so I'm just going to head to town. The trucker turned away from me and looked out the windshield. I could imagine his tongue clicking with consideration inside his mouth. He turned in his seat and shot a quick glance to the back of the truck. I could see it well, but it looked like there was enough room for a row of seats. A lot of folks go missing around here. Hop in, I'll get you there. His words themselves felt warmer than the heat escaping the truck. Thank you so much. I genuinely beamed as I watched him swipe a small pile of contents on the passenger seat to the floor, an odd array of different thumps as the objects hit the carpeting. I quickly glanced back towards the back of the truck, noticing the side of the truck was lacking a logo. The seams were also starting to form spiderwebs of rust on them. The driver must have sensed my apprehension. Another light from within the truck had flipped on. I ain't gonna hurt you, he spoke, his deep southern accent soothing on my ears. I could see his face clearly when I looked back to him. He was a large and intimidating man, without a doubt, his face heavily covered by thick and dark facial hair, a beard that nearly reached past his chest, swaying as he talked like blades of grass in gentle breezes. He was what I would imagine if I was told to picture a trucker. Flannel shirt over his large frame that could pass as a bear in the proper light. His voice, however, was disarming. The way he spoke reminded me of a parent trying to calm their rambunctious child. I gave him an acknowledging nod and put my foot on the first step. He quickly reached up and turned the light off before leaning towards me, with my foot still on the step. One thing, you are not to look in the back seat. The calming aspect of his voice had washed away and dried into a stern cadence, like if a drill sergeant tried to calm down the rambunctious child. I froze for a moment, but as he leaned back in his seat, I lifted myself into the cab. The urge to look into the back seat was pretty immediate as I climbed into the passenger seat. Even out of the corner of my eye, I failed to make out any detail in the back seat. There was only the mask of darkness. I pulled hard to close the door. It shut with a resounding thwack, as if someone had hit the door with a hammer. I don't know why, but I wanted the driver to think I was strong and capable of defending myself, so I closed the door really hard. He didn't pay any mind to it though. He just readjusted himself on the seat and pressed down on the gas, lurching the truck forward. Even though we were barely moving, I could feel the movement of the truck rattling my insides and clicking my teeth together. Watching out the window and doing my best to fight my curiosity, my senses began to pick up on my surroundings. The first thing I noticed is that the inside of the cab smelled absolutely horrendous. The heat was blasting onto my face, and while it didn't seem like the driver was an incredibly messy person, the stench of rotting garbage and iron wafting into my throat complied nausea in me. I didn't want to come off as rude, so I initially did my best to ignore it, but as the smell got to me more and more, I desperately wanted fresh air. My hand ran over the interior of the passenger's side door, looking for a button or a crank, anything to crack the window. There was nothing, other than the handle I used to pull the door shut. The deteriorating leather texture was bare of any mechanism. More troubling than not being able to open the window was that I didn't even find a handle to open the door with, only a vacant divot where one once was. Doing my best not to jump to conclusions, or let on that I was internally becoming troubled by my escort, my breathing had to remain convincingly calm, so I continued to let the swill that hung in the air dilute into my lungs. Wanting something to focus on, I shifted in my seat and looked straight ahead, watching the white line flowing like water under the wheels of the truck. "So, what kind of cargo do you transport?" I asked. I figured I'd be more comfortable if we had a conversation started, and maybe I could gain information that would put my worries to bed. All the while, I was thankful that his rearview mirror was poorly adjusted, showing the ceiling of the cab. I wondered if he did that before I stepped in. I could momentarily feel his gaze wash over me before returning to the road. "Meat," he said in a matter-of-fact tone. Admittedly, that was the last thing I was hoping he would say. I was turning to face him when the headlights reflected off the road sign, briefly lighting up the cab. In a short time, I was able to catch a glance of the blue jeans he had on. More importantly, I was able to see the blotches of dark stains on said jeans. Dark red stains that glinted in the light, splattered like a Jackson Pollock on his ripped blue jeans. I doubted that a man like him was wearing fashionably torn jeans. It was getting harder to still my breath, and I had completely forgotten my attempts to make conversation with the driver. "I appreciate the ride. I'd like to get out now though," I attempted to say. My words were limping and shaking, my hand subconsciously reaching for the door handle that I knew wasn't there. "We're not that far off. It'll just be a few minutes," he retorted. "You don't want to get so close and end up missing like that poor Marlin's girl." His words felt like a house of cards in my head, like they'd fall apart in the slightest prodding. I don't know why. When I heard him saying the girl's name, I started to turn my head. My vision landed on him, but my head kept turning. My body reacted past my own will as I tried to peek at the back seat. Something shiny. I saw something shiny. My vision then went black as the driver socked me right in the face. My head flew back and bounced off the window. The punch wasn't hard enough to break my nose, but it was hard enough to make me turn away from the back seat. "What did I say?" The driver growled, his words becoming one with the hum of the truck. "Keep your damn eyes forward." A bead of blood trickled out of my nose as I obeyed his command and tried going over my options. There was no way I would be able to overpower him. No way I could just reach over him to unlock my door so I could escape. So deep in my thoughts, I almost didn't hear the noise coming from behind my head. A soft and wet groan saturated the dry air. As soon as the noise began, it was muffled out by the radio. The trucker's massive hands turned the dial to the right as he glared at me, the whites of his eyes slicing my intentions in two. Through the blaring of some talk show radio, I could feel a pain growing on the back of my head and a buzzing that accompanied it. I darted my vision around, looking for anything I could use to my advantage. My feet felt across the carpet, thinking that maybe something he knocked into the ground would be useful. I tilted my head down, the soft glow of the radio barely illuminating the floor. I could see the green light falling on a length of rope. Like a call for help, whatever was in the back seat started to press hard into the back of my seat, sharp pressure points forming onto my spine. It had been so long since I had taken a breath, I hadn't even noticed that I'd stopped. But when I could feel fingers on my back through the seat, I let out a gasp and swallowed the stench. The heat and the smell had never been heavier than they were in that moment. The trucker once again didn't react. Both of us just stared at the road. We could both feel it creeping up. Out of the corner of my eye, she was leaning forward. The face of Laurie Marlins appeared in my peripheral, her wild red hair hanging ragged over her eyes. A panic swarmed over me, and I reached down to grab what little rope there was, hoping I could contain the driver. But as I hunched over and turned to the side, I locked eyes with Laurie. Only the deep-sea blue eyes I had seen on missing posters weren't there. Instead, I was peering into an empty cavern that resembled a hole dug through rock, the dark of which stretched on forever, just as the night did. Her face wasn't pretty and pristine. It was stretched out and clumsily held with wires onto a raw body that looked like it had been skinned. The trucker turned quickly and pushed the thing back, all while spouting expletives. It wasn't Laurie. It was wearing Laurie. The way the thing tried to fight the trucker was animal-like, and the shrill cries it gave off rose above the radio. I almost didn't hear the click in all the commotion. My door had become unlocked, and the handle be damned, I rammed my shoulder into it. I felt the heavy door move out a bit before being halted by the hatch that required the handle to move it. Something had to give though, and while I continued to pound my shoulder into the door, the trucker grabbed the rope from my hand, burning it in the process, and reached towards the thing in the back. The cab continued to rock as the pain in my shoulder grew to almost unbearable levels, but with gritted teeth I continued. While fighting back, the thing reached towards me and placed its hand on my shoulder, its wet and pulsing hand. When it was up close, I was reminded of slabs of meat I would see in the deli aisle. Its veins moved like worms and inflated as blood pumped through them. I could feel every detail through my clothing. This was enough to give me the motivation to near break my shoulder with one more assault on the door. With a hard impact, I felt something dislocate, and then the door give way. The cool air rushed in as I crumpled out of the cab. Falling several feet, I met the ground, almost landing on my head, but managing to twist myself. Lifting myself to my feet, it became apparent that I wasn't able to lift my right arm with the immense agony clouding my thoughts. My left hand would have to do. I rose it up as hard as I could and slammed the door shut. The radio and the struggle inside the car were muffled by the truck's engines. Then I heard a tapping. Faint at first, but as the struggle continued, it grew. Like stones being thrown at sheets of metal, I heard a chorus of tapping, until stones turned into a hailstorm. The source of the noise was the side of the logoless truck. Mindlessly, I walked along the side of the truck and listened to the commotion going on inside. It's estimated that around 70 people have gone missing on the highway within the last 3 months alone. At the moment, I was listening to the song of those missing people trying to dig their way through the metal. I continued to walk along with the truck until I found myself staring at the back. It was blanketed in chains and locks. The chains were rattling as the tapping started to sound against the back of the truck, as if the things inside knew where I was. I heard another door slamming, and it nearly threw me off my feet. I stared at the corner of the truck, waiting to see what would come around it. The tapping stopped, and the sound of one set of footsteps closing in on me was all I could focus on. My chest became lighter, and I heard the hard grunts of an overweight man that sounded like the huffs of a grizzly bear. He placed his hand on the corner of the truck and brought himself into view. He was sweating and covered in scratches. The brake lights covered the both of us in a deep red veneer. It was hard to see the blood oozing from his injuries in the light. He was breathing heavily as he stared at me, clearly trying to collect himself. "They never go missing," he stuttered out through the exhaustion. "I always find them. Make sure they don't find no one else." A few coughing fits decorated his speech. He looked up at the chain door and back to me. "Don't know why, don't know how, don't care," he stated, almost as if he was mining my head for questions. I considered he was trying to save me from looking at the thing. Maybe he had just caught it before seeing me. "It's eyes," I said, almost beyond my control. I couldn't get the image out of my head. I'd seen pictures of caves found in the forest, how the brown of the rocks would tunnel in until there was only darkness. How hypnotizing those places must be. How they feel like they're calling out for someone to explore them, to pay them attention. He took his hand off the truck and leaned back. I did the same to see what he was trying to look at. He was looking at the lights of the town. We must have been only about a mile out. I completely lost track of time and distance through the ordeal. "Once one sees you, they all do," he warned. I thought of all the faces and vagabonds and weary travellers, how they were being worn like masks by the numbers, and that they were all looking at me from inside the truck. "I gotta turn around. Can't go into town like this." His breathing had become considerably calmer. I don't think he was exhausted from the struggle. I think his breath became riddled with frantic anxiety. "I'll be okay," I replied. I wanted nothing more than getting to watch that truck drive far, far away from me. The trucker nodded and turned back to the cab. "Thanks for the ride," I said. Empty words filled the night as he vanished around the corner. I walked back by the side of the truck and past the front of it. I continued walking along the road, covered in the silk touch of the yellow headlights. I heard the horn of the truck echo through the night like a trumpet of war. I turned to face the cab and met eyes with the trucker. I lifted my arm and stretched out my thumb as far as I could see. The headlights dimmed and the truck drove through the grass to turn around. It only took me about an hour and a half or so to limp my body into town. I was thankful to find the mechanic before he closed up shop. He said he could help me in the morning and gave me directions to the hospital for my arm. I spent the night in the hospital being worked on. They popped my shoulder back into place. Couldn't feel a thing. I just kept thinking about those eyes when the trucker honked his horn and I turned to face him. I could see her eyes like they were only inches away. My vision tunneled in on them, and they became all I could see before he started to drive away. Laurie Marlins now has the most alluring eyes I've ever seen.